Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gig Member Q&A call. Today is Monday, October the 28th. Your host, James Cronk and Scott Massey with you. And on today's call, we're diving into a skill that can make a huge difference in your role as a club manager. And that's learning how to effectively manage up. Managing up is all about building a strong, productive relationship with your board and aligning your club's operations with their strategic goals. But we know that that's a lot easier said than done. When you think about it, balancing board expectations, differing priorities, and managing those board members that don't have the same depth of operational experience that you do, even though they think they do, is no small task. So with us today is Carolyn Kepcher, an industry expert with a wealth of experience in the club and hospitality sectors. Carolyn's insights are going to give you all the strategies that you need to strengthen your leadership and help you guide your board towards long-term success. So without further ado, James, I'll pass it over to you to kick things off with Carolyn.
You know, Scott, one of the things that I love about Golf Industry Guru is that we get to talk to so many amazing gurus that are experts in their field. And, you know, last week was at a National Club Managers Conference, and this topic was discussed and came up. The whole topic about governance, about managing up, about leading your boards, and about the whole role of the CEO versus the old days of being a secretary and you know, the volunteers running the asylum. So managing up is so critically important, and couldn't be more excited about our expert guru that we have with us today. I mean, Carolyn's wealth of experience in the business world. I mean, for goodness sake, she's a Toastmasters Golden Gavel winner, an author, a few years ago, a TV star on a show that we're going to ask her about, and now a partner with DENEHY Club Thinking Partners and doing real work all the time, working with boards. So without further ado, let's bring on our very special guru guest. Carolyn, welcome to the Golf Industry Guru live Q&A call.
Thanks very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I know you're in Killington, Vermont, at a beautiful ski lodge resort that you just said, I think this morning you woke up with a little bit of dusting on the ground. Is that correct?
We did. Yes, we did.
So that must A, get you guys excited, and B, scared to death, because that means that the ski season is almost upon you.
The ski season is almost upon us, and sad because it means the golf season is behind us.
This is true. This is true. In many parts of Gig Nation, but in other parts of Gig Nation, they're just ramping up from a season of heat to now really some very busy golf times. And Carolyn, if you don't mind, you know, we can't do it justice talking about the journey that you have had in your career and the various different roles and areas that you've gotten into. So could you share with our audience, you know, your story? And please take your time. Tell us your story that's got you to this point in the club industry.
Yeah, I guess I think it's a long story. Like most people who got into this industry, I started when I was 12, 13, 14 years old. Snack bar girl, you know, selling sodas and hamburgers at a country club in Westchester County. Did that for many years, and then I kind of got promoted to waitressing in the banquet area. Eventually got promoted to the floor manager, all while I was still going through school. And then when I finished school, I was a business major, and I continued on with hospitality. So when I graduated, first thing I did was reach out to jobs I thought were best in line with what I knew, more than I knew what I learned in school. So I got a job in New York City as the assistant manager of a restaurant on 49th and First Avenue. And I was taking the train in every day, and I did that for a while. And then back then you took out the New York Times and you looked at job postings, which you don't do anymore. And there was a position for director of sales and marketing in a country club. So thought it was interesting. I applied, and it was in Westchester County at the time I was living there. So I said, okay, this would kind of be nice. The winter commutes are cold. So I went on an interview, and I didn't realize it was at the, it was at Briar Hall Country Club. And I walked in, and the place was horrific looking. And I'm surprised I actually entered the building. And I met with the general manager at the time. And he had told me that the club had just gone into receivership. It was owned by then Marine Midland Bank, which is HSBC now. So I said, okay, this is interesting. So what are we doing? He said, well, we've been hired by the bank as a management company to get this for sale. So we actually had to open up this club on our own. We closed off half the building because you couldn't even walk through. It was banquet halls, just ceilings falling down. I can't believe I stayed as long as I did. But I did finish the interview, and he did hire me. So we went through a brand new marketing plan. It was up for sale, so we could only sell annual memberships. And we did that for about a year. And during that year, we were entertaining possible buyers. And it was one day, I think it was like a Sunday afternoon, and I was about to leave, and my manager at the time said to me, hey, Carolyn, we've got a prospective buyer. And I said, well, you can handle this one. It's the end of the day. I'm tired. I want to go home. And he said, no, I think you're going to want to meet this one. So I said, okay, who is it? And then he said, it's Donald Trump. And of course, I said, sure. And we laughed for a little bit. And he goes, no, it's him. So now we're thinking, okay, well, maybe he's going to bring some people or have people show up. And sure enough, an hour or two later, big limo pulls up, and out walks Donald Trump. And at the time, I thought he was 8 feet tall. And we showed him around the property. He asks every single question, more so than anybody would ever ask. He definitely had insight. We walked hole by hole by hole, and the clubhouse, which is fun because he didn't want to see the clubhouse. He just said, we'd rip this thing down anyway. I just said, okay, that's probably a good idea. So eventually, the club was sold to Donald Trump. My general manager at the time of the sale had moved on. So I was the second person kind of in command. So when it came to going into his office and kind of presenting, that was me, along with my team at Beck Summit Management Company. They're in Florida. We had a great support staff, but I was lead and I was very young. And we sold him the property. I guess he was impressed, so he asked me to stay on. And gosh, the rest is almost history. After many years of permitting and building, branding, you name it. And we finally got Trump National Golf Club opened. The first one was in Florida, but this one was the Westchester property in New York. So that was the second one. And from there, we went on to open Bedminster, New Jersey, then Trump National in Los Angeles, and it just kind of exploded from there. So I had a fun start. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not finished. Hold on, there's more. There's more, right?
Well, then you became a TV star, right?
I forgot about that point. I worked for Donald for 12 years. At one point in time, he said, I'm going to do this. First of all, he said, the Survivor guy? And I said, I swear I thought he was talking about a cancer patient. He said, the Survivor guy. And I said, who's the Survivor guy? And he goes, Mark Burnett. I was like, oh, okay, that's Survivor guy. And he said, well, he wants to do a TV show with us. And I said, he does reality, right? He goes, yeah. I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You're going to have cameras going through the 26th floor of the Trump organization. We're just going to be exposed. It's a really bad idea. And I think it's hokey. So that was the end of that conversation. Less than a week later, he calls me and he said, remember I was telling you about that show with Mark Burnett? And I said, yeah. He goes, well, I'm going to do it. And I said, I'm glad you took my advice. And he said, and you're going to do it with me. And, I had no idea. I walked in to call it the set, Trump Tower, met with Mark Burnett, kind of sat me down and told him how it was really going to be played out. And once I understood it, it was pretty exciting. So within days, we were filming our first episode, And I did that for 5 seasons, and it was pretty extraordinary, a wonderful life lesson. Was able to meet some great people, more importantly, some great people in the golf industry. And then after that, I went on my own. I did a little media company, but missed the golf industry. So got back into some club management. And at that point in time, I was kind of ready, and my kids were grown. So I was looking for my next venture, which was is now in Killington, Vermont. So my husband and I have opened up the Snowed Inn, which is a 20-room hotel at the base of Killington Mountain. And then I received a phone call not too long afterwards, and it was my friend Dan DENEHY. He asked me, he said, "So, are you ready to come out of retirement?" And I said, "Dan, I'm not retired, but no." And we discussed, and it's just, I love being back in the industry, and I've known Dan for so long, and I just couldn't refuse. And so I've been with Dan now for a couple of years, but I've been a friend of the firm for so long, and I'm so happy to be a part of it. And so right now I'm taking on some projects, and there's so many aspects to DENEHY Club Thinking Partners that it's even bigger than I thought when I joined here, and the team is, I would say, second to none. So that's where I am. That's my little journey. The rest, I guess, is history.
And more to come. There's no
and more to come. So much more to come.
And I guess you're well suited then with that background, and certainly some of your roles. And I know and like you said, DENEHY does so many wonderful consulting projects and work within the club space. But today, one of the things we want to just talk to you about was this challenge that managers can face about managing their boss, their boards, whether it's a developer, whether it's a celebrity owner, whether it's a board of volunteers,
right,
and all those things above. What are some of the common challenges, I guess, that club managers can face when trying to manage their boards? What do you when you work with managers and you come to clubs? What are some themes that are consistent?
Well, if there's one thing that I think every GM or COO has come to terms with, boards are basically, they're made up of a group of people, and what they all have in common, they all have a genuine love for their club, and they want it to succeed. And they all have their own ideas sometimes about how they want their club to succeed and fit in. And then you always get the handful of board members who come in with their own agenda, and they want to be on the board because they have something in mind that they specifically want to change. I want to make the tee times half an hour early. I want to see, Mick Ultra on the golf cart. I want to see the green Gatorade on the golf cart. I want to see the bar open until 1 o'clock in the morning. So, everybody has their own agenda. And those are the challenges. And I think the goal here is really, there's, I'm going to kind of jump into some of these strategies here because they kind of go hand in hand. Most challenges are when somebody comes to the board, again, bringing their own agenda, and then it's kind of up to everybody to address it. So the one thing I'm going to offer is you need to be patient. You need to be patient, especially because a board specifically is ever moving. It's always evolving. You're always going to get different people around the board. Just when you get to know somebody and you think they're great and you have established a relationship with them, before you know it, they're off the board. And then there's some members of the board that's been on for 2 years. You've gotten to know them, and you know what? You're kind of happy they're gone, and that's okay. But trying to be patient and more importantly, being respectful, because everybody's going to have their own thoughts. You never want to dismiss anybody's idea, but you also need to be focused. So keep your top line. I don't want to say important, but I'm going to say important. Keep the top line things always on the top of the agenda. What color Gatorade? You know what? Let's talk about that next. And I'm not putting you off. It's important, but let's get through these things first. So, managing up, again, everybody wants the love for you even have that. You share that with them, the love for your club. But being respectful for those who kind of have their own agenda. And sometimes they can bring in great ideas, great suggestions. And sometimes they're so far outlandish, or they're just so trivial that you're going to be respectful, you're going to be patient, and you also want to involve your president and your board, and sometimes behind the scenes saying, hey, let's get this agenda on right. Let's stick to the agenda. So when you go into a board meeting, the president has got to basically stick to that agenda. He's got to be with you. You've got to work hand in hand. This is the agenda. We're going to spend X amount of time on each topic. These are the important ones. Let's open it up for discussion. And you know what? If it's something we need to address, let's address it. If it's something that we can put off, let's put it on the agenda for the next board meeting. So I would say patience and being respectful are probably your two keys to managing up on a board level.
Yeah, I love it. I heard a great suggestion last week at this conference about the importance of onboarding, board members, right? And about, this one recommendation was, if you've got some new board members coming or running for the board, taking them out somewhere, for coffee on kind of on their turf, not in the club, but going out to their turf and meeting them in their office and just having a conversation about their love of the club, but also to try to uncover, like, do they have an agenda and what is it, so that you kind of are prepared, to understand, whether there's Gatorade or whether it's the bar being open. So just making sure you try to get that in the very beginning. The other thing that I love too, that we talked about previously was the importance of gathering everyone's opinions. Like you said, keeping the top line items on the agenda. If you keep the board busy with important things like capital planning, strategic planning, finance management, they don't have time to get into the weeds and talk about French fries, right? So keeping them busy. I think, when you talk about the work that you guys do, has that changed, Carolyn? Do you think that, I know we kind of hear this a little bit about, in the old days, people joined a club because they wanted to be with their like-minded people, and they want to be part of a club. And today it seems a bit more transactional, where people are joining a club because they want to tee off every Saturday at 9 a.m. or they want that bar stool to be available for them when they want it available. And it doesn't have the same kind of objectives. Do you come across that a little bit? Do you think there's been a little bit of a shift in the club culture?
Oh, I think there's definitely been a shift. I hate to say, in the olden days, as you said, it was a privilege to belong to a club.
Right.
And now we kind of hear and feel people kind of think it's, it's a right to belong to a club, and it should still be a privilege. People go, it used to be where clubs, they do what they can because they want to support their club. And it's, what can I do for the club? And there are clubs out there where there's members who are like, well, what can the club do for me? I don't really use a locker. I really don't I don't want to be charged for a locker, but let's support your club. I'd like to kind of use this space and waive the fees. And it's really all about, this is your club. A club is an extension of your home, right? So I think there isn't there has been a shift, a culture shift, if you will. And after COVID, more and more people are joining clubs, and it's more about, the accessibility and raising their kids in clubs, which was, of course, back then too. And it's nice to see. We always love to see, family clubs and juniors. We love the legacy program. It really goes to show the strength of the club and the longevity of a club. So is there a shift? I would say, yeah, and we'll see, what the shift is in 10, 20 years. I know COVID certainly has changed that, where you never saw a waiting list before. Now there's waiting lists everywhere, which is great for the game of golf.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. It really is fascinating how the terrible pandemic has made such a demand and increase and really changed people's mindsets about obviously the value proposition of joining a club. Obviously, people are seeing the benefit of that investment, and the benefit, of course, is that in the club world, they've now been able to do some investments into various different amenities or improvements. The club that you started with wouldn't be able to exist today, day and age. Scott, let's jump to the question about communication, because Carolyn, when we talk about, proactive communication techniques to keep your board members informed or engaged, like you said, without feeling micromanaged, or that being respected and listening to their opinions, what are some recommendations you have with communication?
So I said before, first of all, we need to kind of keep a top line, but also I'd like to really emphasize, boards bring in a general manager or COO for a reason, because they expect you, and you are the expert in your field. Where you can get into a board will always have different opinions, because they're golfers, they're eaters, they're tennis players, but they're also doctors and lawyers and investment bankers, whereas this is what we do for a living. And you need to get that respect and gain that respect and be able to share the opinion of treads and what works and what doesn't work. What has always bothered me, and I know some people say it, but I'm going to tell you it bothers me anyway. When people say, well, it's their club, it's their club, they can do what they want. Well, then why do you need a GM or a COO? You're there to navigate the ship, right? And to navigate the ship, you need to stay online and let them trust that you know what you're doing in the operation. And I'm going to talk to your onboarding. It is so important yes, GM, this is your role. Your role is to make sure that every board member knows why they're there and what their role is and what their role isn't. Some people just kind of go on the board and they wing it and they learn and they figure it out as they go along. The onboarding process is your job is to think in the future, strategically, financially, approve the budget, ask the questions, don't get involved in the minutia. And a general manager, a COO, should not come to a board meeting and bring up the small things, because once you do, now all of a sudden it's a topic of conversation. And now I don't want to say now they have a say, but it's a topic of conversation that will never go away. Things in the operation you should be able to handle. If there's, small HR issues, bigger HR issues are obviously a big thing. If it's tactical, if it's operational, if it's the cost of this, if it's the hours of operation, that's yours. There's no need to bring that into a boardroom. Should you report on them? Yes, that's what the manager's report is. This is what's happened. Maybe you won't see Sheila's face in the restaurant anymore. She was let go for this. And a question or two may come up, but it's not a conversation. It's not a discussion. That's your role. You're the director of operations, if you will. Let's talk about, high priority things like capital budget, strategic planning, financial, big HR issues, and moving forward. And it's very difficult to keep that online because board members sometimes haven't seen each other for a while. The worst thing, by the way, I'm going to say, do not serve dinner or drinks during a board meeting. I have been in 3-hour meetings, and all of a sudden we're talking about the color of the Gatorade on the beverage cart. Yeah. Keep it very succinct. Keep the issues down to X amount of time minutes per. And if you can't finish it, then it goes to the next meeting or it goes offline. And keep it to an hour and a half. And that's up to you and your president to really kind of dictate and navigate that board. And really sticking to the essentials, keep it high level, and let them, and that's part of the ongoing process. It goes hand in hand. This is what I'm responsible for. This is what you're responsible for. And, the two shall meet, but hopefully the two shall never meet. And knowing those roles will keep a board very, very much in line. And I know we're going to kind of talk about a little bit of the importance of board retreats. And I suggest that every board, whether you're a fantastic board or just a board that's trying to improve themselves, everybody should go through a board retreat.
And I'm going to ask that in a second. I want to get back to the micromanaging part, and in your experience, Carolyn, and with the work that you guys do with various different types of clubs, do you think that the club that talks about French fries for an hour is the rare occurrence, or do you think it's more of a common occurrence? Because when I'm hanging out with a bunch of general managers over a beverage talking about their trials and tribulations of the day, it certainly seems that there's more the clubs with great governance, where everyone has been onboarded, knows their lane, and talks about high level issues. I don't know. That seems to be a bit more rare than does the board that wants to talk about whatever HR stuff or operational stuff, or how come the we haven't painted the parking lot stripes on the parking lot lately, whatever it might be.
Because it's easier. Let's face it. So you go to a board, you say like-minded people, right? And whether you're a board member or you're just a member. So what do they all have in common? They all have the club in common. And it's much easier and more interesting to talk about things that can be changed and complain about than, how good the greens are. And people can talk about that for a while. It's just human nature. And so you hear the expression with GMs, oh, I have 350 bosses. You don't. I don't subscribe to it. I know some people do. You don't have 350 bosses. You have 350 people who want to tell you your opinion, and that you're going to listen to their opinion, and you're going to formulate really good decisions based on those opinions and with the support of your board. You work for the club, you work with the board, you work with the executive committee, you work with the president. I always, when I have a GM comes up, because I have 350 bosses, I said, if one person comes out of the pool, can they fire you? No, that's just not the way it works. So getting that, onboarding, but sticking with the important issues. And you're always going to get people who complain about French fries are too spicy. The French fries aren't too spicy. And I'm only using your example. This tree should be cut down. It's in the way the tree shouldn't. And it's always going to be, as long as a healthy conversation. Annual meetings, I've heard horror stories. I've been involved, in horror stories of annual meetings when something small comes up and it takes over the entire time, which can happen in a board meeting. And it's really keeping those things in place. I'm going back to being respectful. I'm going back to having patience. And, once you have a board that is understanding about their role, you have a respectful and patient GM, which is not always hard. It's not always easy, especially if you're walking the golf course, you're walking the pool deck, and somebody's got a complaint. Don't dismiss it. You may think it's unimportant, but it's important to them. And maybe there is something to be said about that. Maybe there is something that you can take from that and improve. But it can be tough. And that is, again, kind of the job of the GM. But I think the importance is the board, the executive committee, and the president all working in hand with the GM.
I had a general manager at a club that I was on the board of, and one of the practices that they had, which I liked, I was the president of the board. They used to send a weekly email on Friday afternoons. They would update the board with because there was so many things going on at this club, and to try to keep people from coming up with their own stories, and I used to work for a fellow that, when I first started as the GM, I would write these lengthy reports, for the first month, quarter, monthly reports. And I know after the third month, he never read them again. But in the first 3 months, I wanted him to know that he didn't need to worry, so a little bit of over education. Do you think that that's a good practice, Carolyn, for GMs to send written reports to their board, or, regular updates, that kind of, lengthy board reports in writing in advance? It's like consent agendas. For goodness sakes, if you're not using a consent agenda, you're going to speed things up a lot more in your board process by using consent agendas and committee reports and all those types. We could have another session on this whole topic. But,
yes, we could. Yes, we could.
But do you think it's good to communicate and overshare, or do you think it's like it can lead down to the path of maybe too many questions? What are your thoughts?
I think we're going back to the two buckets again, right? We're going back to, the high level and what's important, and the trivial things, right? So, those are going to come to the board, but the answer is over communicate. You can't communicate enough. You can't communicate to your members. You can't communicate enough to your board. Again, do they need to know the trivial things? No, they're going to trust you. If they have a question, they should be able to ask it, and you should be able to have a quick response. Over communicate. I was just this morning interviewing for a director of communications, And we had this conversation. And what makes or breaks a board is the communication. Because if the members don't know what's going on and they see something, they question it, and I think you just alluded to it, the stories are going to go, and you're going to have 6 different stories, and before you know it, it becomes fact. The only way, the best way to avoid all of these is over communicate. The last thing a GM wants to do is to have a president call the GM and say, hey, what's this here? Your job is to make sure that your president and your board is in the know at any specific time, especially if it's going to come out, as they say, in the rumor mill. Over communicate to the board. Make sure your board and you are on the same page before any communication goes out. Having the blessing and the discussion of all board members. And yes, put that in writing, put it out to the membership. And if there's an ongoing problem and it needs to be over communicated, today, tomorrow, and the next day, then that's what needs to happen. But what's not a good practice, and it's unavoidable, but you will have board members. If there's 7 board members, you're going to have 3 people who are going to get on conversation one night, and they're going to formulate, some kind of story or some kind of issue. And it's almost not on purpose. It's, again, general nature of people. But to make it effective, to make it efficient, it should be done in a boardroom setting. So all of those questions, all of those, these scenarios can all be addressed. Everybody's on the same plane. And then that way it stops the I've heard this, I've heard that. It allows it allows the general manager to streamline the information, and everybody's on the same page. And sometimes it may be an employee issue where it's an employee issue, so you don't want to discuss it with the entire membership. But something needs to be put out there, something needs to be addressed, because what breaks good clubs are lack of communication. And I can't tell you how many times in this business I've heard that clubs have fallen apart because members feel like they're not really told what's going on. And they deserve to know what's going on because they're our members, and a member is a part of that club, and they deserve to have answers, but they deserve to have the right answers, and not we're just addressing it. Well, okay, say you can address it, and I don't know is an answer. I've always told all of my staff, I don't know is an answer. So you can go and say, we don't know, but we are addressing it as a board, as a committee, with the general manager, with the team leaders, and we will get back to you. But you better damn well make sure there's a follow-up to that. So communication is your key.
And there's nowadays, there's so much great technology out there, that makes these things so much more efficient and so much, easier to do, whether you're a big club, small club. There's so much technology out there. You mentioned retreats, Carolyn, and I wanted to ask you about retreats and the value of it, but B, I sometimes feel like, in my humble experience, sometimes, that like every retreat's like every board wants to revisit the strategic plan. Every board wants to revisit our values. Every board, they want to start the whole making the pie all over again from scratch, right? Instead of realizing that we've been working on that previously. If it ain't broke, there's no need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And let's keep making sure that we're having conversation. We don't talk enough, and I don't think there's enough conversation that goes on about how are we going to pay for the roof in 4 years, as opposed to let's talk about, should our logo be a new color, right? So how do you, from a retreat standpoint, how do you put them together? What are the topics you think are most valuable? Do you survey board members in advance? All that kind of stuff. What are some best practices, I guess I would say, for retreat?
I'm going to address your first point. Most people don't think about, the roof in 10 years. And I'll tell you a big reason for that is people on the board for a short period of time, right? So everything seems to be short-term thinking, and it's what can we get done under our leadership? So we built the clubhouse, the brand new clubhouse, with this board. So it's always the short-term thinking. And I can't tell you how many clubs do not have a strategic plan. Having a living, breathing document that is always changing and always on task. So if you have a long-range committee, it is important, the strategic committee, it is important that their succession plan understands the role of that board. And you could say that about, all of your board members. Trying to stay on par with that is difficult. And, CapEx, I've heard clubs say, well, we need a walk-in refrigerator, but we also need to invest in new dining room chairs. But let's get the new dining room chairs because that's sexy. The walk-in cooler really isn't very sexy, and nobody's going to notice it. And I'm not going to get credit for getting a new walk-in cooler because who cares? Except it keeps your food and your beer cold, right? So part of that, has to do with the entire plan and trying to keep everybody on task. Board retreats, it's a service that's offered at DENEHY. Dan is the leader in that. His background, he just has a finger on the pulse of everything. Governance with him and even Bob James, who is executive of Westchester Country Club. The two of them are just a dynamic team. They can whip a board and shave. I'm just going to say it, but they do it in a way of understanding. And again, going back to this is your role. This is your strategic plan. This is how you follow your strategic plan. And this is how you follow up on your strategic plan. And you're always going to look at that strategic plan and you say, are we off? And if we're off, how much can we, regain? And what can we put off in order to continually stay where we should be? You're not always going to be 100%. Things come into play, the economy, membership levels, different people on the board. Things like that are always moving parts, but the plan itself should change as little as possible. And Dan with Bob really keeps people on track about that.
They I don't know if it's, well, I'm sure it's accurate, but I always hear this term that, the average length of a GM at a club in North America, 3 years, 3.2, whatever, 2.9.
Yep. Yeah.
And I sometimes, don't always think, I don't think that's a good length. I think 5 years would be a good length. And I never know whether or not that's because, the GM CEO is just so sick and tired of talking about Gatorade that they decide to move somewhere else. And it gets actually to the importance of managing up, which is about interviewing the club before you go. Because, you really need to do your homework before you take a job. And I always say that what's weird about our business is that, you take a job and then your number one priority is to keep a job. And sometimes you can't make the difficult decisions, or you don't make the difficult decisions because it can put your job at risk, right? And there's your term.
Yeah, well, that happens, and I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna actually say this is why I think DENEHY excels. Our average GM is more like 7 years, and I'll tell you why. Because it's really easy you go out to a club and we're looking for a general manager, and it's I don't want to say it's easy, but okay, let's check the boxes. The financial acumen, the leadership, food and beverage knowledge, agronomy. I mean, you could check all these boxes, right? But we really look at culture, and our goal is to make sure that the person who's hired is the person who sticks. We don't want somebody going in there for 2 years. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the club. It's not healthy for the individual. And culture is so important because you're going to become a part of that culture. And yes, GMs look at, well, what does it pay? What part of the world, is it in? And those are all really important. But you got to ask yourself, is this a club where I can see myself in 5, 10 years? Now, granted, perhaps they may not come in 10 years. Perhaps there's another opportunity. Hopefully it will only be a better opportunity. Culture is so, so important, but and I say this to search committees, I say this to board members, you are selling them as much as they are selling you. You want this person to be a fit. And if they don't feel that they are fit, then let's find somebody who is a fit, because that's the person who's going to last. And there are, I hate to say it, but there are presidents, there are board members that do come in and they have their own agenda. And in order to get their own agenda, that means, going against the GM. And then before you know it, that perhaps it's a good GM that's lost. And that's kind of how you have member turnover. I know some GMs who have been at clubs for a very, very long time, and they are they're ingrained, they're happy, their kids have almost, grown up in that area. And, it's a happy life, to be honest. I was with the Trump Organization for 12 years, and I was with the organization because I enjoyed what I was doing. I was appreciated. And that's kind of the stickiness of the GM. And, hopefully we'll get that number from 3 as the average to move up to about 5 or 10 would be nice.
Are there some differences? I mean, you just touched on a whole bunch of really great things about a fit and about culture.
Yep.
Are there differences and I think there's a question coming up, Scott, about the difference between boards and between working for a developer or working for a multi-course operator or a private, maybe it's a real estate company and golf is part of it. And what I always say is the difference is often that you're working with experts, because in a club, like you said, you can have a dentist and a plumber and a homemaker and a retired Army captain on your board of directors who all have opinions and all have different ideas about what is supposed to be success look like. Whereas when you're in the private club world, generally speaking, the goalposts are a lot often more clearly defined about what's the objective. So are there some differences there in managing up when it comes to who you're dealing with?
Oh yeah, there's a difference, period. So kind of going back to the member-owned clubs, sometimes the goals are short-term. With a developer, long-term, who you're dealing with. The answer is you're probably going to be dealing with the same person or the same persons for a long period of time, and they were part of your strategic plan from day one. So, for instance, when I worked on Trump National Westchester, I worked with Donald. It was one of his first golf courses outside of Florida. We're stuck with Fazio. This is who we want to be. This is how we're going to get there. This is the team that we want to see. And I hate to say the value proposition, but this is the price we're going to get, and this is what we're going to offer. And since then, it's okay. Now we have this Fazio design course. Now we're all going to put in, the swimming pool. We're going to bring in these amenities. That so much doesn't change. It really doesn't go off course, if you will. Also working for a developer can have various properties, right? Something like a Troon or something like that. They own a variety of properties. And then you have a regional vice president who's going to oversee a variety of properties. That can get a little tricky because, well, it's maybe under the same brand. They're in different locations. They're a different culture. I'll go back to Trump. Trump National Westchester is very different than West Palm Beach. Palm Beach and New York crowd are two very different people. The needs are more. The social events are different. The like-mindedness can be different. The course itself, perhaps there's a little bit of an age gap on average age. How does the course play? So, we say that it's on brand and you're not changing, but you are changing per club. The club comes with its own culture and its own fit, as we just discussed. So that can certainly be a challenge. What's the negative of a developer? The negative of a developer, it's typically the developer's choice. The decisions are always come from the top, but you get a developer who hears other experts in their field and is willing to listen. And I will say I did have that throughout the Trump Organization. I also had that in my member-owned clubs. So there is a difference. Managing up is different. If you're there for 10 years, you're managing up to maybe 20 people plus over your lifetime. Whereas you're working for a developer, you're working with the same person or same persons for that period of time. And that can be easier, sometimes harder.
I think one of the things, that's excellent and really good overview of the various different challenges and strategies. I think one of the things that I find enough managers don't have is they really haven't gotten clarity from their boss, whether it's bosses, boards, whatever it might be.
Mhm.
Real clarity on how do they how are they measured? How's their performance measured? It's what are the KPIs? What are the key factors that is going? And more importantly, how do you make sure it's factual and not interpretive? How do you?
Attainable.
Yeah, and attainable, exactly. I mean, what are those SMART goals that that a GM has? And I think that we're sometimes afraid as managers to ask for that clarity, sometimes because we're afraid of it, or we think we're not going to be able to achieve it, or we'd rather just kind of sit below the line of being performance based.
Right.
But the reality is, I think, is that it's critical that how do you keep score? How does your club keep score? How is the game won? And then you can say, when you're having that conversation all of a sudden with a new president that says, I'm not happy. Well, okay, let's look at the facts.
Yeah.
Let's look at the facts.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because too many times, at least in my world, when I talk to boards, I talk to presidents, I say, what's the bonus structure? And they say, well, it's up to 20%. I said, I understand the number. What's the criteria for getting there? So typically there's none, is my point. Well, he's done a good job. He was on budget. She surpassed her numbers in the food and beverage. Those are all factual, and those are good testing points. Start from the beginning, and that's something that we really excel at. When we're looking for people, we have critical success factors, and what that is if we present that now, that's what's in 5 years. What is it going to look like? What do they need to get to in order to be successful in 3 or 5 years? So we start with these critical success factors, and we base their working with the board. Obviously, we base their compensation package that way. So there's KPIs. And I've even seen some clubs that say, okay, well, 20% is beating budget, 10% is member survey satisfaction, and 5-10% is subjective, and that's okay. But to have a 100% subjective, which is too often too much, all you need is one member who didn't like the color of the Gatorade, who can't get that right. I'm being silly, but somebody who just didn't get their personal agenda, and it's going to reflect on the GM. Whereas if that was the case, then you can turn around and have this piece of paper, which again, we help structure. Okay, you might not have liked this decision, but 20% was based on, the food and beverage, member satisfaction, the number of members, the number of members we retained. So the KPIs, put it on paper, review it every year. And you're right, a lot of GMs are afraid of that, because they're afraid, if I'm just nice and I could be, just take the subjective route, I just have to play nice. And some GM will turn around and say, like, well, it's their club. If they want to do that, that's great. And that's only going to get you so far, because maybe there's a bad decision in there. It's a bad decision, but you want to stay below the line and you want to get that, 100% bonus. But there's safety in numbers, right? There's safety when you have things written down. You can go back and say, okay, well, this didn't, but I did make my budget, and the number of members did retain this number, and the food cost was this number. Member satisfaction was this number. That way, it's a lot easier for the executive committee to sit down when you have this meeting, because you don't want to say, well, we didn't like this, but what percentage is that? And it's a guessing game. And some of these board members are just not in that role or that position to understand it. So putting things on paper in the very beginning, and again, we structure those for you, is critical.
Yeah, and I think also, like you said, making sure that everyone understands what's more important than the other. I always laugh when a board is freaking out because the food cost is 1% over budget, yet they're selling $100,000 membership, and they're lining up at the door because of the Sunday buffet. It's like, give your head a shake about what actually. I like to say, I used to have a conversation with my chef at a golf course restaurant. I used to say, look, you're not measured by your food cost being up by 1%. You're measured by every 8 minutes $400 walking off the first tee. Like, because if people are here because they're love the burgers and love the wings and they're playing golf, we make our money every 8 minutes on the first tee. We're not going to make or break the bank based on you getting to 34% versus 35%. As important as that is, you still got to put things in perspective, right? So, we only got 10 minutes left. I want to make sure I get to a couple things, and so I'd love to ask you, and we're Switzerland, by the way, in Golf Industry Guru. So we don't pick any sides or any kind, whether it's Toro or John Deere or whether it's political parties in Canada or anywhere else. But you said you loved your time in the Trump organization, and you must obviously, I mean, believe me, people that know me know that I've worked for some interesting characters in my day, and I actually consider myself an expert at managing up, because I've had to manage up some very interesting people, and Scott knows that. And
pretty sure Carolyn has you beat, though, James.
Carolyn totally has me beat.
Yeah.
But I guess, Carolyn, is there some challenges that you found, and that you kind of were able to kind of overcome, and I would say it high profile, because it's no different than being at the premier club in your neighborhood. It's when you all of a sudden get to a job in the world of being a CEO of a top 10 club in the country, or a top 10 club in your neighborhood, the profile and the chatter and the challenges can sometimes be more magnified and can impact your career. So were there some things that you is that where you learned some of your best practices in working with the organization like Trump's organization?
Yeah. I would say, working for the Trump organization was probably the best education anyone could get. It's, you got to have thick skin. It's tough. He is not an easy person to work with. And yeah, I think where I was successful, there's a lot of people, or someone like that, he can be scary. He can be scary because you don't want to be on this bad side. You don't want to say the wrong thing. And I use him as an example, but I was always pretty truthful with him, and tell him how I thought. And I didn't always win, but you say it enough, and if you kind of have enough wins, he understood that where I was coming from. And when I had enough wins, then he could take me, I don't want to say take me seriously, but he started taking me seriously. And maybe he was listening to me a little harder. That's 12 years in the making, and that's him entrusting me enough to, be on The Apprentice with him, because he trusted my advice. And, if it was trivial, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. But if it's important, and you think it's going to have an effect, an adverse effect on the organization, the club, the brand, the culture, then it is up to me to sound the alarms and make a difference. And sometimes I would have to push hard, and that wasn't always easy. But I was never the type to turn around and say, well, it's his club. And you know what that means? That means, if it fails, it fails. It's not my fault. And I used that example earlier for GMs who take that position. I want to be successful. I think GMs in the whole want to be successful. And people hire you because they're going to trust that you're going to take them to a successful place. And that may look very different to people. So success could be a healthy bottom line. Success can be a fantastic member survey, a great member experience. Success can be your award of the President's Cup. Success comes in all different sizes and language, and that's why it's so important to be in line, having your strategic plan, but being in line with your board so you can attain these goals, whatever those goals are. In my case, the goal was to open one club, open a second, open a third, open a fourth, and be a high-end luxury brand. And we did that. trials and tribulations. And sometimes, here's an example. When we were building Westchester, he'd say he wanted high slope rating. He wanted this to be a challenging course for the tour players. And I get the mentality, but if you want to sell a membership to somebody who shoots a 90 and he comes in every Saturday morning and he's shooting 120, I guarantee you he's not showing up very often. And if he is, he's coming for a hamburger, because the course is a turnoff. And I was pretty open about that. It took a while, but after many years, trees were removed, and not just because of me, because just this is the way it happens. The average golfer was complaining. So again, those are things that as an expert are going to make you successful. And sticking with your guns and continually stay with that, not swing because it's easier, is going to make you more successful than the person who just says, "Hey, it's their club."
I think Scott, we kind of captured right there our post Q&A call promo blurb, because I think what you're talking about there, Carolyn, is so critically important, which is that when you work for strong people like that, they don't have you in that position just to say yes all the time.
Right.
The best guy I used to work for, we used to have these battles all the time because he liked it. He liked the challenging conversation of having a conversation around who convince me this is a good reason. Be convicted to your opinion about why this is important. And if you're the expert, then you're going to be successful more often than not. And you're going to make, like you said, you're going to have wins. And when you have wins, you get respect. And when you have respect, people will follow you to the ends of the earth. I mean, that's just leadership. So, what I love about that message there, and really to sum it up, is that when you're hired as a CEO, a general manager, you are the expert, and you are driving the ship. Like you said, you're leading the ship, and you better make sure you navigate it around all the challenges and get it to its final destination. You can't just take your hands off the wheel and say, let's hope we get there.
Exactly.
Good luck to everybody. Carolyn, I know that you do lots of great work, and Denny, he does lots of great work in the space. How can our listeners learn more about board retreats, learn more about your executive search, learn more about the consulting work that you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty broad spectrum there. So obviously, DENEHY Club Thinking Partners online. There's a lot of information there. We all do our own, podcast broadcasts. We're very involved in the CMAA and all the associations out there. But many people think that we're just executive search, where we go beyond that, as I've mentioned throughout this podcast. Consulting, governance, strategic planning, surveys. Turf management, just such an array. And obviously all that is on the website. But we are pretty much full service organization for the private club sector and resort industry. Very happy to be a part of it. As I said, the team is second to none. And I mean, I've learned a lot in my many years. I'm always learning from my team and Dan. So yeah, I do encourage you to, even if you're questioning something that we've talked about, pick up the phone. Dan and I spoke at a president's council one day. I got a call 2 days later. It says, I understand what you're talking about when it comes to the board versus the GM. We're having this conversation. So what should we be doing? And I just had, a 20-minute, conversation with him. And a month later, he called us and, said, we need your help. We're happy to do that.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Scott, any final kind of questions, comments?
No, I think just a big thank you, Carolyn. I mean, just obviously great to have you with us today. We really appreciate your commitment to the industry and sharing some of your knowledge with us today. It's just been fantastic, and no doubt tons of great ideas that people can take away from today's call. We had a big turnout on the live call, which is just a testament to I think your position in our industry and how well respected you are. So thank you so much again for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah. It was fun.
Yeah, great to have you, Carolyn. And ladies and gentlemen of Gig Nation, or of those that want to join Gig Nation, we're up to about 240 hours of training content for staff at your club that they can get access to, whether it's videos, courses, podcasts, blogs, or live Q&A calls like this one. So if you want to learn more, reach out to us. But otherwise, as always, we'll see you again, and we will see you on the inside.